I want to turn here to Courtney Hazlett, who writes The Scoop for MSNBC.com and is with us here in New York, and obviously is one of our entertainment correspondents on television side. And the irony of this event for you is that you have been in touch in the last few days with people organizing this vast comeback tour, this 50-concert thing that was supposed to launch less than a month from now in London. Where did they think things were, and where did they think he was? Would this have been did you get any hint that Michael Jackson was ill?
Not at all, Keith. I've been on almost daily contact with these folks, and I spoke to them just today, and they were expecting Michael at the Staples Center at the same time that news broke that an ambulance had just been at his house. And I cannot, you can't downplay the shock that's rippled not just through the crowds that you're looking at outside the UCLA Medical Center, but in his inner circle. And I've been keeping in touch with him about his routine. He had 6-hour-long practices, not 7 days a week, but that's actually what Michael was requesting. His people were saying that this has been just such a wonderful, invigorating experience for him. He really felt like he was getting back on top of his game. He was getting back to what he loved, and that was performing and doing things to a magnificent degree. And at every turn, they were the first ones to say, no, the rumors that you're hearing about his health being in poor condition, they're not true. He's feeling great. He's been getting physicals routinely. And so to say this comes as a shock, you can't express in any way just the magnitude of how taken aback his inner circle is. I was speaking to some people who literally were crying over the phone because they just could not wrap their brains around the fact that they're standing at the Staples Center and he was not going to be there.
You mentioned the dedication and the fact that they actually had to pull him back from the effort to prepare for this tour. Was there a read from them on his mood? Because obviously after the publicity that ensued from the 2005 trial, he left the country, the hemisphere. Went to the Middle East and lived there for a time. When he appeared in public, it was usually in some sort of disguise or local garb in hopes of not being recognized. There was a time when, to some degree anyway, he had receded from the world. Was that period of time over? Was this a fully enthusiastic personal thing for him to make this comeback, or was it caused by finance? What were they telling you?
They were telling me that in some ways that period of time was over to a certain extent, insofar as he would go out into public to this day in some sort of disguise. That was for his children. He really did not like the fact that his children were under such scrutiny and were being judged at every turn because they were his kids. He first and foremost was described to me as a fantastic father, and then when it came time for this concert, if you recall that press conference that took place in London, that was a huge turning point for him. When he saw the crowd reaction, and literally the world took that press conference and watched every moment, and he barely said a word, that's really the turning point for Michael Jackson. I think when you're looking at these crowds, and you keep saying how it's so impressive that it's a quiet group, there's decorum, and that speaks volumes. I think part of it is this is a multi-generational pop icon. There are people who've been following him since the Jackson 5, and then there are people who started with Thriller and even more recently. So the fact that so many generations had come to really respect his work and respect his artistry says a lot and speaks to why the crowds are out in such full force.
Yeah, that's a great point, because when you think of the other landmark dates of sudden and unexpected death of international musical icons, the two dates that pop into I think anybody's head would be August of 1977, when Elvis Presley died, on a few days before he was supposed to go to upstate New York and do start a series of concerts that was essentially a comeback for him, and December 1980, of course, when John Lennon was assassinated by Mark David Chapman here in New York City. But when you hit those dates, you realize, well, Elvis Presley, for all of the hits and all of the greatness and all of the performances and all of the Elvis impersonators since and all of the Elvis sightings and everything else, Elvis Presley's career spanned basically 1954, 55 to 1977. That's 22 years. The Beatles' prominence and then John Lennon's solo prominence is 1960 to 1980. Michael Jackson, dating back to the Jackson 5 till this afternoon, to this anticipation of this tour next month, that's basically 1967, 68 to 2009. That's a career twice as long, nearly all of it in the public eye, nearly all of it with something of his playing on a radio or an MP3 player somewhere, and he spanned the whole time for twice as long as Elvis Presley and John Lennon individually were performers. It's an extraordinary career, especially for a man who had just hit 50.
It's an extraordinary career. I mean, I grew up listening to the Jackson 5 in the car being driven around, and then the first cassette tape, one of the first I ever had was the Thriller tape. So, you know, it's the sort of thing that brought families together, and I think that's when we spend a lot of time questioning why people are celebrities and why they're worthy of the attention they get. And I think the one thing that true celebrities have in common is they are a point that bridges a gap. They are what brings several generations together, and you're definitely seeing that here with Michael Jackson. It's such a shame that it comes as such a shock, not just to the world, but to the closest of his inner circle.